Reddit, what is the creepiest true story someone has ever told you? Mom told me, when I was a wee lad, that I used to get up in the middle of the night and keep watch over the hallway. She'd see me sitting at the edge of my bed in the dim light. When she'd ask what I was doing, I'd tell her, "Shh, I'm waiting for them to come back. You need to be quiet or you'll scare them away." Second-hand story, but I asked the people who were there and they all say it's true what happened that night. I'm a logical guy, can explain away most stuff, and if I can't, I just dismiss it. But there's one story that I've been told by 4 different people in my family at all different times, and the story is the same. One night on the res, way back when, it must have been a year or 2 before I was born, there was an incident. I pieced it together because I heard different accounts from different rooms in the house where it happened. It was my grandma's house and everybody was gathered there for some reason. I heard there was something weird going on in the hills or something, so they all gathered together. My sister said the adults got really nervous and sent all the kids to bed in the same room. There were a bunch of kids lined up sideways in one of the beds. She said that all of a sudden something started to bang on the walls trying to find a way into the house. She lay in bed with all the other kids and then the adults broke out hollering and yelling. They were holding the back door closed. There were 3 men there, my dad, my uncle, and, damn it, I can't remember the third. The sound stopped and it was quiet for a few minutes. That's when one of the kids noticed a big shaggy head looking through the window at them. They all took off into the living room. What was happening at the back door was the 3 men were leaning on the door and they couldn't hold the door shut tight. Something would ram the door and it would open a couple inches and they'd push back and slam it back shut. Now my dad and uncle were loggers, hauling around big-ass chainsaws back in the day all day. Whatever was outside was almost overpowering 3 of them. Finally, whatever it was left the back door. Then they heard the kids screaming. Whatever it was must have gave up and left after looking through the window. Next morning, when they finally got up the courage to go and look, they saw that everywhere that whatever it was touched was muddy. The closest creek was down a long hill. Mud prints where it was pushing on the door, around the entire house, and at the window where the kids were in bed. The window is about 7 feet off the ground. Now, logically, it was just a bunch of res drunks trying to break in. But, I asked and everybody who was there says that it wasn't. In those days, if it was drunks, Dad would have just gotten a stick and gone to town on them. Not to mention my uncle who was protecting his mom's place that night. What freaks me out about it is the mud and the big shaggy head part. To this day, if there's a window at night with the curtains open, I can't really look outside without a chill shooting up my spine. I always thought they were all putting one over on little FJ, but it's always the same story. Dad believes in Bigfoots because he's seen them. Closest he said he got was about 100 yards across a steep valley. He was cowboying down south of here and there it was across the way watching him. He said it was the freakiest feeling he ever had. He hustled his herd up after that. There's this other story he told, only once because it's probably not a happy one. His 2 brothers were riding, horses of courses, around this mountain near here and they found something. A little figurine or something. Statue. A little carved something at this. How to explain? Like an altar I guess. In the middle of the woods, up this mountain. They took it and then started having bad luck. Very bad luck. This was back when the area where I am was still pretty far behind the rest of the world. Roads would be closed for extended periods of time during winter and spring. Anyway, one of the brothers was working at the sawmill, just over the way from here. Believe me, everything is just over there, with Dad. They were out in the bush cutting down trees and hauling them in when a tree throned on my dad's brother, one of many uncles I never knew. Oh yeah, throned is what he calls it. When falling a tree and it splits up the middle before falling. Seen it happen a couple times and it's dangerous as hell. And it smashed his insides. He managed to get him back to camp, but they couldn't get out into town because the roads were too bad. So Dad had to watch his brother die a long painful death. So, one of the elders told somebody in Dad's family that it had to be the thing they took. They had to bring it back. So that's what happened. Still, whatever it was must have followed because the other brother disappeared. Mom told me this story and I never asked Dad about it. He is 1 out of 17 kids. Not entirely sure how long I can make posts, but I'll see if I can add a few more. My dad used to cowboy down west of the river and there are stories about down that way. Ghost stories like the time 4 of them were camping by these 4 trees. There was something about the trees and they knew they should have camped somewhere else, but they did it anyway. In the middle of the night when the fire was low, 3 of them woke up to one of the other guys screaming and yelling his head off. They all looked and could see a dark outline of the other guy hanging in midair by one of his feet. Somewhere in that same area, my dad and his cowboying buddy told me that there was a place that the cows avoided. Cows would lay down and not be able to get back up, like they were stuck to the ground. They said that place was like a bowl shape, a crater I guess, but people that would try to make camp there would fall asleep and wake up feeling really heavy. I'm starting to nod off and my stories are getting choppy. So, I'll tell you this one last one that same cowboy told me about working down that way. He told me this after telling me his old cowboy ghost stories. Tells me, if you ever go down that way and go wandering around, you stay on those cow trails. Sometimes people go down there and they end up disappeared. It's grizzly bear area and pretty remote. I figured people just got lost out in the mountains or fell in the river or something. I asked what happened to those people. Well, those cows know not to wander off their own trails. There's deep cracks in the earth down there. Animals fall in them sometimes. People too I guess. Just go missing. To me, that was scarier than anything else they told me about down there. Imagining somebody falling into one of these cracks and stuck deep down in the earth, legs pinned and not able to get out. Dying that way has to be a bad way to go. I was down there when I was a kid, Dad showing us around his old stomping grounds. I see a rusted up old truck hood sticking up out of the ground. I thought somebody must have just taken off the grill and fenders and put it there like that. Nope, there was a whole truck in the ground. Way back in 5th grade or so, I discovered a glorious Pokemon-themed chat room through the wonders of Yahoo. Within this chat room, there were maybe 15 regulars, generally between the ages of 12 and 16 or so, and we had a great time role-playing various anime characters and storylines. Anyway, I got to know a few people from there well enough to chat with them on AIM or by phone, and a few of those friendships lasted a good 4 or 5 years. One of these guys was a little eccentric. He loved creature/monster models and stories. Stuff like Godzilla, Spawn, whatever. He believed in things like chupacabras, which I thought was silly, but didn't really care. And he lived out in the boonies in some Midwestern state, which all seemed like hick land, to my young West Coast mind. After getting to know him pretty well and having a good 100 hours of phone conversations over the years, he finally revealed this lovely story. He told me that sometimes he would black out and wake up to discover that he had, or was still in the process of, hurting or torturing animals and children. He had quite a few cousins and neighbor kids who lived nearby, and apparently had killed some animals. When he revealed this to me, I felt sick inside. I love animals, and this information chilled me to the bone. It was really hard for him to tell me this, and he confided that I was one of the only people he had ever been able to tell. Then, it got weirder. Someone in his family, or maybe a family friend, decided that he must be possessed by a demon, and that they had to perform an exorcism. They did it at night, of course, in a dark room lit by candles, and he tied to the bed because they didn't know how the demon would react. He was choking up as he described this part. I could hear his voice quivering because he was so emotional and terrified at this part of the story. He described a pretty creepy process, but the worst part was the end. He said they heard something hit the floor under the bed when the demon left his body, and then something scrabbled across the floor and out of the room in the darkness, leaving claw marks in the wood floor. He was totally and completely serious about this, and how it cured him and he didn't hurt things anymore. As any sane person would do, nope right the fuck out of that situation. Okay, this is going to get buried, but this is a legit creepy story involving a jar of hearts. My high school teacher told us a story about his friend living in rural Arkansas. He, the friend, meets a girl at the Walmart register. They talk and hit it off pretty well. She is a nice religious girl, exactly like the one he wanted to be with. They exchange numbers. He calls. They have long conversations deep into the night. They go on dates. She is a genuinely nice girl. She ended every phone conversation with a prayer, "We thank our Father," or something like that. The guy is completely smitten. She finally calls him to come to her house at 7:30 one Saturday night. She tells him to come there at exactly 7:30 and not a minute later. She says that if he is even a minute late, she will break up with him. The guy was a little league baseball coach and had a game on that day. The game was supposed to end a few hours before that, so he accepted the offer. On the day of the game went into overtime, or whatever you call it in baseball. It went on longer than expected. The dude, coach, was getting a little nervous, but he still had plenty of time. The game ended a little late, but 3 of the kids' parents hadn't arrived yet and he had to drop them off home. Panicking, he really doesn't want to miss his chance with the nice girl. He tells him to hop into the car and speeds off. After quickly dropping off the first 2 kids, he decides the 3rd kid's house is too far off, so he leaves him on the road and begs him to go walk home. Yeah, very douche move, I know. He rushes home, showers, gets dressed in a hurry and tries to go to the girl's home ASAP. He arrives at her house at 7:35, 5 minutes late. A woman in her mid-40s comes out and tells him Clarice, the nice girl who called him over, said you are late and wants you to go away. Heave. Dejected, he goes back home. A few days, or rather, the next day I think, later he sees the local news. He sees the house and it looks familiar. It is the girl's house. The police are leading a handcuffed woman out of the house. It is the 40-year-old woman that had spoken to him earlier. Behind her is the girl he was dating. He was shocked as the headline read child kidnappers or something like that. He expected the police to visit him soon as well, because he was dating the girl. Soon, as expected, a police officer comes to his house and asks him if he has name. Greater than the guy is nervous but knows his rights. He asks if he should get a lawyer or not. The policeman tells him that he is not legally allowed to tell him what happened, but felt a moral obligation. This is where the story gets creepy. The policeman says the women arrested were engaging in human sacrifice. In their house they found the missing children's remains. There was blood all over the walls and jars of hearts labeled with the names of the missing kids. There was an empty jar that had the dude's name on it. Turns out, the girl invited him on a date at her house at 7:30 to kill him in a ritual human sacrifice. The ritual apparently had to be executed with precise timing. His being late saved him from being ritually sacrificed. Needless to say, there are some crazy cults in rural Arkansas. As somebody who is caught between a strong Christian, Southern Baptist, even, upbringing and reconciling all of that fun with my current agnostic-ish views, I've always wondered what the hell happened this night. In Beaumont, Texas, there is a place called Saratoga or Bragg Road, with some degree of paranormal history. I've gone a number of times with my family and sometimes you see a little something and other times you don't. However, one night that we headed out there was decidedly different. Our group piled into one truck for this. It's Texas, everyone has a truck. I was probably 16 or so at the time. It was me and my, at the time, stepdad in the truck bed and my brother, mother, 2 cousins, and my aunt in the cabin. We had decided to go to Bragg Road because it was a happenstance occasion. We all happened to be in town on a Wednesday night where none of us had to be anywhere the next day. We figured that nobody would be out there, which tends to improve your chances of seeing something. I've got an uncle with absolutely terrifying stories from the road, but that's a story for another time. The way things work on Saratoga Road is you drive slowly down the 1-lane dirt road, and then if you want to you double back and drive it again. On our first run through we didn't see anything even remotely paranormal, though we did pass by a sketchy group of young, college-aged, men and women who had pulled over into a small clearing in the swamp and were just leaving their car. They gave us some nasty looks, as if we were intruding. Well, we decided to drive back down the road a second time just to see what we could see. By this time we had forgotten entirely about the other group of people. We get to their little impromptu campsite and they've done some remodeling, so to speak. They had erected some kind of pole with a pentagram painted on an affixed sign and were standing around a campfire, talking softly to themselves. Remember those nasty looks from earlier? We got them 100-fold then. So we passed by the creepy group, my stepdad and I being the only 2 truly face-to-face with them. The others could just close their windows. Not 2 minutes later, we suddenly start hearing crackling noises. My stepdad pushes my arm anxiously and points up to the treetops, saying, "Holy shit, look." Lo and behold, there are bluish-white motes of light, about 2 or 3 feet in diameter, rapidly fluttering about the treetops. They stopped for a moment, hovering about 20 feet above us before suddenly descending. Freaking out harder than I ever did before or ever have since, my stepdad and I begin banging on the window, screaming drive. Drive. My aunt, the driver, stops the car to ask what we were so freaked about, prompting us to scream louder. So we do our best to hang out as we suddenly take off from 10 miles per hour to about 50 miles per hour on this narrow, 1-lane dirt road. The lights continued to follow us, getting closer all the time and making this noise. I can't really describe it as anything but disturbing. It had some kind of high-pitched ethereal quality to it, but it just felt alien. In the sense of not normal, of course. When we got to the end of the road we all bailed to our respective cars ASAP. We regrouped at a gas station a few miles away and compared stories. Everybody saw the same thing and heard the same noise. I don't believe we've been back since.